It's 7:30 in the evening here in the UK, and I can't imagine a better way to be spending my Saturday evening. So thank you all also for taking the time to just hear about some of the things that I have to say and to share. So as Kyle said, I sometimes introduce myself as a mathematician turned educator, and I guess I stopped studying mathematics formally about 10 years ago, but informally, I've been hooked on the subject for as long as I can remember. And since I've entered the education space a few years ago, there's a particular conundrum that I've been grappling with. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I'm challenged by the idea that there are really two brands of mathematics. There's this brand over here. Hopefully you can all see that. If you can just confirm on the chat, or maybe Carl, if you can just confirm that you can see a bunch of really kind of fun mathsy stuff on the left. Excellent, thank you. So this is what we might think of as the recreational brand of maths. It's playful, it's joyful and uplifting, it's deeply conceptual. We all love it, right? And then there's this other brand of mathematics that we encounter in school, and it's a sprawling mess of symbols. It privileges a very narrow set of cognitive skills like speed and memory and precision. So I've just been wondering for a few years now on how we bridge that gap. And that takes me back to my own origin story, if you like, as a mathematician. So it's the summer of 2002. I'm a high school student, and I'm thinking about my options for university. And I had the opportunity to attend a residential summer school at the University of Oxford. It was a week-long program, and along with around 50 other students from across the UK, I was placed into small groups. And it was really quite novel because over the course of the week, we were placed into small groups, and we were given a series of interesting and challenging maths puzzles. And it was the first time in my life that I was surrounded by so many kindred spirits, and also the first time that I felt any kind of a mathematical identity. Now, when you're in that kind of environment, you pick up certain things. And at the time, everyone was raging about this popular maths book that had just come out a few years earlier. It's called Fermat's Last Theorem. You may know it as Fermat's Enigma by Simon Singh. And this book is great. It does a couple of things. It charts the 350-year journey towards proving that theorem. But more broadly than that, it situates maths within its rich historical context. And that's when I just knew that that was a story that I wanted to be even just a very small part of. So that was a transformational experience for me. And over the past few years, I've been wondering how we can create similar experiences for younger students. I mean, I was 17 when I attended that summer school, but why leave it so late? And so my aim as a maths educator is very simple. I want to help students to develop a mathematical identity. That's really the core. And there's only one way I really know how to do that. And it's to create authentic, honest to God, mathematical thinking experiences. Now, I could spend the whole hour just unpacking those terms. I'm just going to give you a quick summary. I think that means that maths has to be explored. Students need to be given that space to explore rich and deep concepts. And as much as emphasizing right and wrong answers, we should be focusing as much on asking interesting questions and giving students the opportunity to develop their intuitions and to go away and test and validate their conjectures, and to develop the tools of reasoning to rigorously justify their assertions, to bring their ideas to life through a whole range of representations, and perhaps most of all, to not do this as individuals, but as part of a collective through discussion and collaboration. So that led me a few years ago to set up something called the Oxford Maths Club. I was living in Oxford at the time. And here's just a snapshot of one of my very first cohort of students. Most of these students, I should say, were children of friends of mine who were happy to send them along. There they are playing a game. Here they are clutching onto their platonic solids. And as you might imagine, during the pandemic, Maths Club has gone online, and I'm actually now working with Simon Singh on scaling up these kinds of offerings. And at the heart of Maths Club is this. I call it WonderMaths. You can call it whatever you like. It's a range of a collection of mini courses, and each course is around 4 to 6 sessions long. And I see each of them as different entry points to mathematics. They're each designed to elicit the kind of mathematical thinking and behaviors that I listed just a moment ago. And I should say that these courses are not the preserve of the brightest, highest attaining students. My experience shows me that these courses despite taking on some of the richest concepts in mathematics, can actually be made accessible to a whole range of students. And I hope to persuade you of that over the next 45 minutes or so. So I'm going to go through some of these courses, and I'm not going to have time to cover them all. I've had to kill some of my darlings here, but I'll go through a handful of them. You're going to get the highlights reel. And so we're going to start with this course. Oh, I should say, before I go into them, I cannot take any credit for originating the content behind these courses, and that's because it's all already out there. There's the classic recreational puzzle books, the more modern incarnations. There's the great work of educators like Dan Finkel. There's resource repositories, Joe Bowler's UCubed, or Enrich, close to home for me. There are interactive platforms like Mathagon, Brilliant, Desmos. There are wonderful initiatives like James Tanton's Exploding Darts, the Julia Robinson Maths Festival, and of course the whole concept of a math circle is nothing new or novel. So my role is really just to trawl the amazing repositories of content that exist and just stitch together these micro learning experiences. So I'm going to just go through a handful of those courses now, and we're going to start with this one. It's mathematical games, and I think games are inherently mathematical. They're all predicated on a set of rules. We absorb those rules, we put them into practice as we become familiar with the game, and then we start to develop what we think are winning strategies. And what all of the games in this course have in common is that they're very easy to play. The rules are so simple, but they're very difficult to master, and they all require some mathematical insight to really develop those winning strategies. So let's see one of these games in action. I'm going to hopefully flip over to a Google Jamboard, and this is a two-player game called Catch Up. So I need a volunteer. Kyle, are you still there?
Oh, you bet I am.
All right, so this will just take a few minutes. It's a two-player game called Catch Up. You may have heard of it. I first came across this a couple of months ago. It was a blog by Rob Easterway. He in turn had come across it in an academic journal, and you'll see why it originated there. So it's a very simple game to play. You can see there's different blocks here, and they're essentially representations of the numbers 1 to 5. Now, in a moment, we're going to take it in turns to select these blocks, and player 1 can choose any block they like. So they may choose the 4 block. And then the turn passes to player 2, and player 2 gets to choose their blocks one at a time. And they're going to stitch their blocks together to form a tower. And the main rule is that the turn will switch over as soon as player 2's tower is at least as long as player 1's. So right now it's still player 2's go. They'll take the 3, let's say. And now that's it. That's the end of player 2's go. And now it goes back to player 1. There's only 1 block for them to take. They stitch it together, and that's the end of the game. And now player 1 is declared the winner because they have the larger tower. Are you happy with the rules?
I am happy with the rules, and my brain is already turning. I love it.
Excellent. So first thing you need to decide in a two-player game is whether to go first or second. I'm going to help you out. We're going to lean on the wisdom of the crowd. So let's see. I think there's 2 questions in this poll. Just focus on the first question. Is it better to go first or second? Don't worry so much about question 2 for now. We'll return to that later. But help Kyle out. Should he go first or second?
Yeah. And you know what's sad is I want to vote, but Zoom won't let me because I'm a host. It's like, I guess they think I'm cheating because I'm voting, but I feel like I want first, but I'm not sure why I want first yet, because right now I feel like I don't have any advantage yet.
All right. Well, the results are coming through, and we've got 3 options. Maybe it's better to go first. Maybe it's better to go second. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it's just one of those games where if we both play well, it will end in a draw. So I'm going to drag these pieces back. I can just do it this way. And let's see, we've got over 50 responses in. I'm going to give it a few more seconds. And I should say there is a majority view emerging. It's not absolutely dominant. I'll just wait till the minute is up. All right, so we have 37% of you saying that it's better to go first. 52% are saying it's better to go second. 11% are saying it really doesn't matter. So Carl, you didn't get to vote, but you do ultimately get the deciding vote because it's in your hands now. Would you like to go first?
I'm going to go first. And I will tell you, I have never played this game, but this entire time I haven't heard a thing you've said because I've been trying to play out things in my mind here. And I'm like so nervous to go because it's like, I know as soon as I go, I'm going to be like, why did I do that? But
We live to learn. The only way to go. You've got 5 choices: 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. You let me know, and I'll drag it over for you.
Yeah, I think what I want to do is I want to go. I'm gonna pick 2 first. I'm gonna try 2. I have a theory in my mind right now, but I don't know if it's very solid.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. If you go for 2, I'm going to take the 1 because then it's still my go because my tower is still shorter. Let's see, what will I get? I'm just going to go for a whopper. I'm just going to go for the 5. So you.
Okay, and I'm going to go now. I probably should have wondered this earlier, but I didn't until now. Did you say that if mine is as long as or longer that I have to stop? That puts me in a really tricky spot. So I guess I'm gonna just, it doesn't matter what I pick now. I'm gonna pick 4 just to try to make mine as long as possible. But whoa, no. I'm gonna pick 3, and then I'm gonna pick 4. And my theory may have helped me a little bit here. Are
you sure this is your first time playing? That's a very astute move that you just did. So you took the 3, and it's still a go because you can see my tower is still a shade longer. So then you get to take the 4. That's the end of the game. Virtual round of applause for Kyle on his debut. He's managed to get the win. Now,
right.
The question is, was that beginner's luck? Or were you onto something? Do you think going for a 2 at the beginning would guarantee you a win every time? What if I did something different? Is there anything I could have done as player 2 to thwart you? And that question could take us the whole hour. And let me say, this game is fascinating precisely because of how it's set up. It was actually designed by a couple of economists, and they wanted to design a game that promoted equality, that didn't allow either player to get too far ahead, because as soon as you do, the turn switches over and you lose your advantage. So there's a lot of very clever dynamics going on. Now, I will say that your instincts were right. It is better to go as player 1. You can guarantee a winning strategy, but I'm going to be cryptic and tell you it's not the way you chose to go. It's not by taking the 2. But that's something for you all to go away and ponder. And once you've done that, there's nothing stopping you from extending this game to 6 pieces. What happens then? Does player 1 still have the advantage? And what makes this game so interesting is, depending on the number of blocks you start with, the outcomes vary. There are times where it's better to go as player 1. There are times where it's better to go as player 2. And there are times where actually it doesn't really matter, because if both players play optimally, it ends in a draw. And that's just catch up, a game that I think you can play with a 5-year-old, but actually takes years and years to master. So what other games do? Thank you so much for that, Kyle. I may be bringing you back towards the end of the session for something very different. So what other games do we play? Well, tic-tac-toe is low-hanging fruit, but tic-tac-toe by itself isn't very interesting, because it is a game that will end in a draw if you both play reasonably well. But tic-tac-toe plugs into so many other interesting variants. There's 3-dimensional tic-tac-toe. There's ultimate tic-tac-toe, which is given a wonderful treatment in Ben Orlin's Math with Bad Drawings book. There are other games here that you may recognize. There's Catch Up. Here's Nim, where you remove counters, and depending on the rules, the last person to take a counter either wins or loses. This game on the left here is called Sim, where you're trying to avoid constructing triangles over a regular polygon. All of these games follow that theme of being very easy to play, very difficult to master, but where you can develop eminently good strategies in ways that really are accessible to a young audience. So when we talk about mathematics being playful, this course really takes that quite literally. So I'm going to move on now. We go on to this course. I wonder if you can tell me in the chat what you think this course is all about. You may recognize that shape. It's a fairly well-known shape, although the designer's put his own spin on it. And yes, it's fractal. Someone said Pascal. There is definitely a link here with Pascal's triangle. This is the Sierpinski triangle. It's an example of a fractal. So fractals are these mathematical objects. They tend to be shapes that have profound complexity and sometimes incredible beauty, even though they arise through the repeated application of a very simple rule. Now, I love to find intersections between mathematics and other disciplines. And fractals, I think, is just a wonderful intersection between maths and art. So there are certain fractals that get a lot of airtime. You may know of this. This is the von Koch snowflake. So here you start with an equilateral triangle, and the rule is very simple. Whenever you see a straight line, just take out the middle third segment and turn that into an equilateral triangle. If you apply that rule once, you'll go from a triangle to a six-pointed star. Well, now look, we've got loads of smaller lines, so you can apply the same rule again, and you get a more pointy star. You apply it again and again and again, and eventually, if you allow that process to run indefinitely, and we can do that because we're mathematicians, you end up with a von Koch snowflake. And the great thing about fractals is that they exhibit properties that you just don't otherwise find in conventional geometry. So the von Koch snowflake, for example, has a finite area, but an infinite perimeter. Whenever you ever come across that before? And actually setting about proving those two properties is in itself a really interesting exercise. Here's another example. Believe it or not, you can turn a straight line on the left to this dragon-shaped figure on the right in 15 iterations of a very simple rule. That's called the Heyway Dragon. I'm not even going to tell you what the rule is. I'm going to show you. So here we go. Hopefully you can see this animation now. And this is a very simple rule that we're just applying repeatedly to straight lines. And you can see within about 4 iterations, this shape is now crossing over itself. You may still be wondering how you end up with a dragon. That's a shape that looks curved. And once you get to around 10 or 11 iterations, you'll start to sense that this shape is taking on a kind of curvature. Those lines are becoming small enough for it to resemble a curved dragon shape. And this shape in itself is fascinating. It has lots of wonderful symmetries. And again, it all arises from the repeated application of a very simple rule. And there's one more example that I want to share with you. It's John Conway's Game of Life, which many of you may have read about or heard about. This is an incredible activity to try out with students. So you're given a grid of squares, and Conway offered 4 rules for governing life and death conditions in this little universe. And it does take a bit of time to wrap one's head around these rules. I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but you basically have some rules for determining when a square remains alive. So if it's already alive, so it's either switched on or off, 2 choices, and if it's already switched on or alive, then there are certain rules that determine whether it stays alive or dies. And if it's currently dead or unpopulated, there are certain rules that determine whether it gets to switch on or not at the next iteration. So just as an example, if you have a cell that's currently alive and it's got 8 surrounding squares, and if 4 or more of those are also alive, then that's kind of like an overpopulation scenario. And so the square in the middle doesn't have enough resources for itself and it dies. There's also a loneliness condition at the other extreme. And cells come to life if among the 8 surrounding cells, exactly 3 of them are alive. Now, there's only one thing to do when you're presented with rules like this, and that's just to have a play. So I'm going to go back to Chrome. And so there's this wonderful simulator, and I give students access to this straight away, and we can start to just query what happens. And I'm not expecting you all to have followed all of those rules, but hopefully you'll get the gist of it. So if I just place 1 square, and that's really our only role, is to set the starting configuration, because from there, the rules will automate everything else. So if we just put 1 switched on square in the middle, let's see what happens. Not very much. It dies within 1 iteration. And you can see here, this counter is just enumerating through all the iterations. There's nothing else that's ever going to happen. We're not going to get cells popping up spontaneously. So let's try something a little more interesting. Let me offer you a square of squares. Have a think just for a second, if you've managed to follow those rules, what happens? Now, each of these 4 squares is surrounded by 3 neighbors that are alive. And if you remember those rules, or you have reference to them, that's the sweet spot. So they'll all stay alive, and actually nothing else comes to life. So even though it feels like nothing is happening, this is already more interesting because we have a stable environment. These 4 squares just stay alive. That's still not very interesting though, is it? So let's spice things up a little. Let's get some movement going. What do you think will happen with a strip of 3 squares? If you go back to the rules, you'll conclude that some of them are going to die out, some of them are going to survive, and actually there are other squares that are not yet alive that will come alive in the next iteration. And so this is what will happen. It turns into a vertical strip. And now that's after the first iteration. Guess what happens in the next iteration? Well, it's the same scenario, it's just been rotated. And so this is just going to reset back to our starting point. And in fact, if I just play this through, we now have what you might call an oscillatory pattern. It's just going to continue to flip back and forth between those 2 shapes. So now we have a bit of movement, a bit of dynamism. Now I'm going to show you something that certainly blew my mind when I first saw it, because this is the kind of fun that mathematicians have, right? We explore, we just play around with different configurations just to see what consequences there are. And what I'm going to do now is just set 7 squares alight. So 7 of them are alive. And let's just see what happens. I'm going to hit start. And it's a really interesting question. If I give you any given configuration at the start, what will happen in the long run? At the moment, it feels like there's a lot of movement. It really starts to look like a game of life where this thing is starting to take on a life of its own. I'm going to zoom out slightly and I'm going to speed up a little as well. And you can see it doesn't seem to be terminating. And we can ask that question, is this ever going to terminate? Is it ever going to just settle into a stable pattern? Doesn't look like it's going to do that anytime soon. That question, it turns out, is incredibly profound. It's one of these so-called undecidable problems in mathematics. There is no way, there is no single algorithm that will determine in general whether these things will terminate or whether they will just perpetually go on and on. And so that just makes it ripe for exploration. You can try different configurations. And I've chosen this one in a very specific way. You can see you've got all kinds of things going on there. You've got those gliders floating across the screen. You've got lots of oscillators going on. And remember, the starting configuration here only had 7 squares. And I had to be very precise in how I selected those 7 squares. If I clicked one of those squares out of place, you'd see something very different. Now look at that glider that's just floating at the top of the screen there. That's gone into the abyss. It's never going to stop moving. But the question is, will this ever settle? We're still asking that question, and we're almost 3,000 iterations in. And I'm going to give you a spoiler now. This is going to settle eventually. We're going to wait around for it to happen. I think I've maxed out the speed. I'll zoom out a little more. And it still feels like these creatures are having a field day. They don't look like they want to settle anytime soon, but they will. Just give them a moment. And now you may wonder, well, what other configurations can give us this kind of complexity? We speak so often about how rules and procedures are really mundane. Well, they don't have to be, because what you're seeing here is the repeated application of 4 very simple rules that Conway devised. And there's just a profundity to this. I think the idea that if you just start tinkering with your configurations and maybe start to just explore the consequences of our rules, that you can just end up with these incredible systems. We're almost there, but you can see there's still things happening. There are still things being created. And it just feels at the moment like these guys just don't want to relent, but they will do soon. I'm seeing some nice comments in the chat, and this is really just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, this is one of infinitely many possibilities, and this was just with 7 starting squares. Now we're approaching a point, this is where you need to be eagle-eyed, where this will settle into a stable pattern. We're about 400 iterations away. It's almost going to happen. You'll know it when it happens. Keep staring. Your eyes will not betray you. Here we go. Almost there. And now. There we are. That is now the stable system. There's nothing else that will happen. You've got those gliders that are floating away that we can probably track down if we move around the screen. You've got these oscillators, and actually if I just really slow it down and then zoom in a little, you can actually see with raw resolution what's happening there. So they're going to keep moving indefinitely, but nothing else is going to happen. That you can describe that system as being quite stable, but it took 5,200 iterations to get there. And it just makes you wonder what other systems can you create? And I have had hours of fun just trawling YouTube and just seeing the different things that people create. And I can see a comment here from Suzanne saying you can make connections to populations in biology. Absolutely. Game of Life was no accidental metaphor. The speculation that the world as we know it, the universe, is itself a game of life type system. These are just incredible conversations to have with students, and we shouldn't be afraid to put these tools in their hands and see what sense they can make of it. And that's Fractals. Oh, here's another one. This is a glider gun. Every 28 iterations, this little machinery spits out one of these sliders, and they just slide on forever and ever. That's also quite cool. Okay, next course, puzzling stories. So for 4 weeks, Maths Club turns into Maths and Reading Club. Turns out there's a wonderful amount of literature out there that is just suffused with mathematical content. We know the famous examples historically, but even more recently, Maths Through Stories. This is out of the University of Reading. They've gone through a whole catalogue of works of fiction and benchmarked them against different curriculum standards. You may be familiar with the Mathical Awards that reward works of fiction and non-fiction that really highlight mathematical content in real depth. And the book that I chose to deliver the first version of this course is this. It's The Man Who Counted. I only came across this a few years ago. It's incredible. Mulbah Tahan is the pen name of the real author. And the real author was a Brazilian mathematician who was infatuated with the subject, but also was really enthralled by Islamic culture. And so this book is set in the Middle East, and it's really a fusion of the Arabian Nights and Martin Gardner. And so I'll, before I say more, let me just say I have a very personal attachment to this because it was the very first book I actually read to my daughter. That she was a couple of months old then, and here we are a couple of years later when I just finished. This was moments after I'd finished teaching this course for the first time. Yeah, I got a nice R there in the chat. That was an easy win, wasn't it? Now, if you look at this, if you go through the book, if you comb through it, it doesn't look all that enthralling, but actually the prose is magnificent. It really could be mistaken for the Arabian Nights, but there is that key difference that there's mathematical content laced throughout this book. So we read selected passages, students like to take turns, and then my role is to pull out the mathematics and just give us a moment to pause and really puzzle over some of the curiosities. And I'm not going to read through all this, but this is a nice example of where within this story is this very kind of classic weighing puzzle. So you've got a deficient pearl out of 8 pearls, and you've got to figure out what the deficient one is within 2 weighings on a pair of scales. If you go to other pages in the book, you'll find hat riddles. That's my own terrible math drawing. And these are all puzzles that would gladly fill the pages of a Martin Gardner book. And that may well be where the mathematician sourced them from. But his ability to fuse them with bona fide literature just makes this a really potent combination. So that's puzzling stories. And I'm always on the lookout for other stories that combine the two so seamlessly. Next course, tell me in the chat if you can figure out what this course is. You have 2 clues on the screen. You have the clue in the text and the icon. So I can tell you it's not the way it's written. That's not a foreign language as far as I'm aware. I've just done something to the name of the course, and well done, Elise, code breaking. I've applied a Caesar shift cipher where I've basically just taken all the letters of the alphabet and shifted them along 3 letters. So C became F, O became R, and that's code breaking. Or maybe you just figured it out from the icon. So I love code breaking because it just exemplifies how so many of these courses are not burdened with the requirement of prior knowledge. So often we prevent students from engaging with rich maths concepts on the basis that they're just not ready. They haven't yet mastered the fundamentals. Well, what fundamentals do you really need for code breaking other than knowledge of the alphabet and perhaps an eye for pattern recognition, which we really all have because it's so innate. And the ciphers, the types of codes in this course, are carefully scaffolded. So we'll start with something like the Caesar shift, where you just shift the alphabet along. But a real focus of this course is forensically examining each code, its strengths and its weaknesses. So in the case of the Caesar shift, it's all well and good, but you can pick out the high frequency letters and you'll be well on your way. And so as the course progresses, we strengthen the ciphers. This is Vigenère, which is a bit more involved. This is the Lorenz cipher, which makes nice use of binary representations. And another reason I love this course is because it harks back to just the wonderful history that mathematics is situated in. And I'm going to mention Simon Singh again, who's got a whole book dedicated to this, but there's loads of resources out there. I actually found most of my teaching resources for this course on this excellent free resource from the National Code Center here in the UK, and it just covers a whole range of ciphers. And many of these are, again, just eminently accessible to a young audience. So that's code breaking. Let me take a breath and we'll move on to, oh, yeah, that's the hyperlink. I'm happy to share these slides after, or if you just want to take a screenshot, that will get you on your way. Okay, this course, I wonder if anyone can tell me what this icon depicts. It's another course related to games, but not quite the same as what we played before. I love it. Breakout, escape rooms, game theory, says Alana, and that's it. It's game theory. This is a depiction of the prisoner's dilemma, although I'd argue all the other answers there that you've given are just as valid. And so you may know about the prisoner's dilemma. Two criminals have been caught. They're in different holding areas and they're not allowed to communicate to each other. And the interrogators are trying to get a confession out of them. And they know that if they both stay silent, they'll probably be okay because there's not any evidence to convict them. But if one of them confesses and the other one doesn't, then the one that confesses will probably get leniency. So they've got an incentive to do that. The dilemma arises because if they both choose to confess, well, then the evidence is there and they're both going to get sent down. And so that's prisoner's dilemma. And it's an example of game theory. Now, you may be wondering how this relates to the games that we looked at earlier. The games we looked at earlier were all driven by logical, rational choices. Game theory is all about human decision making, and humans, as you know, are not the most rational of people. And so this course really examines the limits of logic and is really situated in this context of where we're trying to understand how we make decisions in an environment that's full of people who are not sure how much to trust. And so you can model prisoner's dilemma. I call it a steal share game. And this game gets even more interesting when you play it over multiple rounds. Imagine you're playing this with someone and after 3 seconds, you get to pull up a piece of paper to reveal your decision. That's how we simulate this in our virtual classroom. And when you play it over multiple rounds with the same person, an interesting dynamic comes in, which is your decision is invariably going to be influenced by what's come before. So there's a real degree of trust and cooperation that's needed for both players to succeed. If that trust breaks down, then they end up in that dilemma where they'll both decide to steal because they just can't trust the other person not to screw them over. But if they both think that way, they don't get any points. And this is actually the subject of intense study. This is a book that came out a few decades ago. I don't issue this textbook in the course. Instead, I just extract its essence. And actually, Nikki Case has an incredible online simulation. You really want to check this out. That goes through the basics of this study that was done, where they examined different personality traits to see what kinds of behaviors and traits lead to the best outcomes. And so imagine if I gave you these 5 personalities. So I'm going to see if I can run that poll again, because this is question 2 in the poll. So if you can have a go at this, ignore question 1 because that relates to the game we played earlier. But imagine all of these 5 personalities played this game against each other, and they played over 10 rounds each time. And we're just going to accumulate their scores, and we want to know which of these 5 personalities is most likely to win out. And they all behave as you'd expect according to their name. So Meanies is a Meanies, they always steal. And on the opposite end, Professor Kind is really quite peaceable, they always share. Copycat starts off by sharing, but then will just mimic whatever you did in the last round. Grudger also starts out quite nice, but will never forgive you and will never trust you if you steal. And then Detective actually gathers data. They do a bit of share and a bit of steal, and then based on your choices, they will then assume a personality moving forward. So it certainly feels like detective is the smartest. And I can see that overwhelmingly detective is the favorite. And when I put this poll to students, it's the same thing. Detective always wins out in the polls. I'm going to end the poll there. 60% of you voted for detective. Some of you voted for copycat. Almost 1 in 5 of you voted for copycat. Prof Kind got 10% of the vote. Grudger and Meanies really didn't get many of the votes. I'm not going to give you the answer now. Why should I? It just makes for an amazing session. In fact, this is enough to fill 2 sessions worth of material, just examining the different personalities, seeing how they interact with each other. And the answer, I'll just say this slightly cryptically, the answer may surprise you. And there are just some wonderful insights into why it plays out the way it does. What's great about Prisoner's Dilemma is the moment you finish that, you can extend the game to multiple people. And that leads you to modeling a tragedy of the commons type scenario. So it's a very real and topical scenario where you've got a limited stock of resources and you have a number of individual actors. And if they all take their fair share, it's fine. The stock will replenish itself. If any individual decides to take a little more than their fair share, then that's also okay. The problem arises when everyone thinks that way and everyone takes just a little more than they should. And at that point, the stock depletes itself. And so it's another wonderful example. Firstly, it's very topical because it obviously models very pertinent issues around the climate crisis. But secondly, it just brings home how we can use logic to an extent in these scenarios, but it's very much driven by human trust and cooperation. And I said earlier, I'm interested in intersections, and this is just a wonderful intersection between mathematics and psychology and economics and ethics. So many wonderful things you can do with that. Let me offer one more example. This is very different. When you have a moment after this presentation, Google the following. Google dollar auction. Dollar auction is like a normal auction where you bid for $1, except the second highest bidder also has to pay whatever their highest bid was. And that sounds like an innocuous addition, but that simple addition to the rules of an auction, that the second highest bidder also has to pay, even though they get nothing in return, that has incredible consequences in terms of just how irrational people then behave. And it's just a wonderful simulation of how we can make decisions that are logical in the short term, but let us down in the long run. That's dollar auction. And there's loads of other game theory type scenarios that I throw into this course. And again, it's really examining the boundaries between logic and trust and cooperation. So that's game theory. Any games by chance in French that I know of? I'm slightly puzzled by the question. I guess all of these games can be played in any language. Do I know of any source material that's in French? I don't think so, but certainly if you were to, the livestock game, so I call this the tragedy of the commons game, I think, and if you get in touch, I can certainly point you to a resource that probably formed the basis of my exercise. The way I do it is I put a bunch of counters in the middle of the table, and I tell the students that if a certain number of counters remain, the stock will double. But if too many counters are taken, then that won't happen. And then it's a tantalizing prospect for them because individually they know that they can get away with taking a few more, but if too many of them think that way, they let the whole group down. So that's just an example. It's a way of modeling tragedy of the commons. If you want to find a resource on that, either get in touch with me or just Google tragedy of the commons teaching resource. And I'll make no bones about the fact that a lot of the resources I find for these courses start with a Google search. I knew I wanted to do something on tragedy of the commons, and it didn't take long to find something. Okay, I'm going to move on. This is one of the most weird and wonderful of all the courses. Again, I don't know why we hold back in sharing this with students. And of course, you've said in the chat, it's topology. So I'm hoping this GIF will work. You can see those shapes on a screen. This, I believe, is the game Asteroids. I say that because I'm slightly too young to remember Asteroids. But this holds true for any number of games of that era and indeed today, where you have this strange property that when a shape gets to the edge of a screen, so let's say the extreme left, it just pops out on the right. and vice versa. And when it gets to the bottom, it pops out on the top and vice versa. So a very natural question is, what surface is this game being played on? It surely can't be a two-dimensional surface that we know of, because when have you ever come across a flat surface where getting to one end transports you over to the other? So assuming that we don't know how to teleport, anyone got any ideas what surface this game is actually being played on? Seeing a lot of enthusiasm for asteroids. I think there'd be just as much enthusiasm once you find out what shape this game is actually being played on. Now, someone says sphere, and you're not far off at all. Wouldn't it be like a map? And so we're thinking along the right lines there. It's not far off from being a sphere, but I'll leave it to you to puzzle over why it isn't quite a sphere. Someone saying a cube, so you're in the right dimension. We're all thinking three-dimensional now. Well, let's start with our flat plane. We're saying that these two ends are connected. So when you get to the top, it just joins up to the bottom. So I'll just join those up and we get ourselves a cylinder. And then the same is true of the other two ends. We're going to join those up as well. So it's not the most elegant thing I've ever made, but there you have a donut, or as mathematicians like to call it, a torus. I've just given you a 30-second spoiler for a discovery that you can really spread out over the course of an entire session. And there's just lots of wonderful ways that you can develop intuitions as to how what looks like a square or a rectangle on the screen actually manifests as a torus. So that's the first session. Now, topology tends to be a very tactile course. We do a whole session on knots. Knot theory is a whole thing in mathematics, and to mathematicians, a knot is just like any other knot, except the two ends are tied together. And so there's nothing to it but to just grab a knot, maybe a bit of yarn or a shoelace, and just start tying different knots and see what you come up with. And then you can start to ascribe different properties, like the number of crossings. And that turns out to be a very interesting property. Mathematicians have spent years trying to categorize all the different types of knots with different numbers of crossings. So for example, you can see here, there is just one knot that has 3 crossings, and that's the trefoil knot. You can see that there are some knots, actually 2 different knots, that have 4 crossings. But then you can ask the question, what does it mean to be different, for 2 knots to be different? And what does it mean for them to be the same? And when you increase the number of crossings, you also increase, or you also get a whole range of interesting possibilities. There are times where you get loads of permutations, other times where you get so few. Actually, I think there may only be 1 4-crossing knot, but that's something, again, you can spend a whole session exploring. Very tactile, that one. You can't really have a topology course, can you, without Möbius strips? Take a strip of paper, twist it at the end, and you now have a shape that has 1 side and 1 edge. When have you ever come across that before? And then you can have students make all kinds of predictions, like what happens when you cut that Möbius strip down the middle, or some fraction of the way in. And unless they're incredibly perceptive, I don't think I've ever seen any student or adult, anyone that I worked with, including myself, get this right the first time. And unless they're really perceptive, they're going to be surprised. And that's because these are some of the most counterintuitive shapes that we've ever encountered in the subject. Why not put them in the hands of students and show them that geometry, as well as being about angles in a triangle and so on, is also about the weird and wonderful. And then just one more example. This is the Bridges of Königsberg puzzle. You may have come across it. You have to visit every part of the city, but you can only go over each bridge exactly once. And you can abstract away and turn that into this network problem. And it's one of those puzzles where you have to draw the map without going over any line more than once, and without removing your pen from the paper. And that puzzle was actually the birth of graph theory, or network theory, as a whole field. And there's some wonderful, very basic theory that determines when it is and isn't possible to solve those kinds of puzzles. And again, that will just lead into all kinds of activities. And it's also just an example, if you're looking for it, of where mathematics that starts out as very recreational and puzzly ends up having immense real world application, because we couldn't really survive in this world without graph theory. Okay, I think I'm on to the last one for now. So we go on to card magic. Now, math magic in general is, it just has so much fodder, but I focus on card magic because I took up card magic during lockdown. We were all looking for distractions, and I found a very pleasant distraction in card magic. Now, card magic presents an ocean of possibilities. It's never ending, thousands upon thousands of moves and sleights and tricks. And it has a lot in common with mathematics. If you're a magician, you're trying to thread together a sequence of moves that all feels very plausible. It's a lot like trying to construct a mathematical proof. But if you're the audience, your job is to try to expose that subtle flaw, that misdirection or sleight. And that has a lot in common with combing the steps of a mathematical argument. And actually, there's a whole subgenre of tricks that rely on mathematical principles. This idea isn't new. Martin Gardner's never far away from the fun. He's got this classic book that links maths to magic. This, I would say, by Colm Mulcahy is probably the seminal work that I've come across. It reads like an undergraduate textbook, theorems spelled out in painstaking detail and proven very rigorously. These are theorems around how to shuffle cards and configure cards. And once you have them, he then applies them in each chapter to develop different card tricks. Now, some of this stuff is pretty advanced, but some of it, again, very much accessible to our young audience. And here's just another example of a book that came out quite recently, Percy Diaconis and the late Ron Graham, taking very deep concepts in maths and computing and turning them into wonderful card tricks. Now, I think I've just about got time to show you one of these tricks. This is going to be done at supersonic speed. But Kyle, if you're still there, if I can ask you to come onto video, because I need a naive, unsuspecting volunteer. Something tells me you're going to be game.
It's actually John here.
Oh wow!
And Kyle is he's in another session right now, and I am here with you. So yeah, shoot away. I'm ready.
Thank you. Well, that's kind of like a disappearing act of its own. So you've already
exactly. It was like one person comes out, the other person comes in.
I have here a deck of cards. I'm going to hopefully just spread them just to show you it's an ordinary deck of cards. And in a moment, I'm just going to riffle through them and you're going to tell me when to stop, and we're going to cut the pack there. So we're just going to try to get a bit of a shuffle going on. Okay, so just tell me whenever you're ready, stop.
Stop.
All right, so I'm just going to cut the pack there. We're going to do it again. And if you like, you can actually just tell me how many cards to take from the top if you want me to be really precise, or we can riffle through it again. Because once we've done this 3 times, on the 3rd occasion, the top card will be your card. So let's do it 1 or 2 more times, and then we can ruffle, or you can just call out a number.
Okay. So you want me to call stop? Is that what you want me to do?
We can do it that way, or you can just tell me take 10 cards from the top.
Oh, okay. And I can tell you any number you want. Yeah, any number I want.
Yeah.
Let's go. Take 7 cards from the top.
7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and I just cut them to the bottom.
Okay.
So we do it one more time. This time,
sure.
Whatever card remains at the top will be yours.
All right. So let's do 3 cards.
Oh, wait, he's gone for a number again. Okay, 1, 2, 3. And there we go. So this is your card.
Okay. Show it. You're gonna show it to me or no?
I am in a moment, but first I'm going to tell you what it is, and I'm going to just make a prediction. And my prediction is that this is a king. And not only is it a king, I need to tell you the suit. So I reckon this is the king of diamonds. How confident are you?
No way. Say that again.
King of diamonds, and how confident are you in my prediction?
Well, I don't think I can't see a way that you would know that, because this is a magic trick. So I would be blown away if you know it.
There we go. King of diamonds. All right. Now, I'm going to do it one more time just to prove it wasn't a fluke and to show off.
All right, let's do it again.
So again, your choice. You can call a number, or we can riffle through. You tell me.
All right. Yeah, let's ruffle through this time a couple times. So ruffle through. Stop.
All right. So no slights happening here. Hopefully you're all persuaded I'm not putting anything up my sleeve or anything like that. So
okay.
We stop there, or do you want to go one more time?
Dude, it was glitchy for me. So sorry if I didn't call it out. Do it again.
That's okay. Okay, we'll riffle again, and you'll tell me when to stop, and this time that'll be your card.
Right. Okay, good.
Happy with that?
Yep.
All right. And I want you all to have probing eyes, probing minds. There are clues inherent on the screen as to what I'm doing. You see, this time, John, I reckon you've got yourself a 9.
Wow.
And I reckon it's still a red, but you had diamonds last time, so I'm going to say 9 of hearts.
All right, give it to me.
Shall we find out?
Yeah.
Hearts. So there's one way that I could have done this trick, and that is by memorizing the order of all 52 cards.
Right. Now,
That would be
I have a prediction.
You have a prediction?
I do, but I don't want to ruin your session. I love magic tricks as well. I wonder if anyone else has a prediction too. It's like,
yeah, if you figured out how I did either of those.
So. I think so. Well, can you remind me what that was a 9, and okay, and you told me a king. Yeah, and there was a king. That's the setup. And my other one was a king, right?
Yeah, I'm
trying to remember.
There are 2 people in the chat that between them have got it. There's 2 things going on, because I haven't memorized all 52 cards. That would be a really lame trick.
Right.
A lot of effort.
No, yeah.
I've just used a very simple piece of mathematics to figure out where all the cards are. And as you can see, more than 2 people now have got it in the chat. So the first thing I've done is I've just separated each card by a value of 3. So this is the card on the bottom of the deck, right? It was on the bottom, and then I turned it over as casually as I could. And then I knew your card would be 3 values along. And if you're wondering what happens after 10, it goes Jack, Queen, King. So 11, 12, 13.
Right.
And then you go back to 8, which is 1. So I knew it'd be 3 along. And then I just need to figure out the suit. Someone said chased order. This isn't their first session in Magic, because they know that a very common way to organize the cards is clubs, hearts, spades, and diamonds, which very nicely has a chase. Nice. So that was a club. I knew the next one would be a heart. And the lovely thing about this is that the structure is preserved whenever we cut, because it's a cycle. When you get through all 52 cards, the card in the bottom and the top also follow that same rule. There is so much foundational mathematics in this, the kind of mathematics that may otherwise be ignored. I'm not sure how much attention magicians pay to this. This is called the Cy Stebbins memory deck. Cy is S-I, and I think it was short for Simon. I'm not sure how much he went into the actual mathematical theory, but he has a number of things on his side. Thanks so much for that, John. And one of the things that you have on your side here is there are 13 numbers, 13 values in each suit. And that's a prime number, which makes it co-prime with every other number. And it makes it co-prime with the number 4, which is how many different suits you cycle between. And I'm now just throwing terminology at you that is, perfect fodder for the standard school curriculum. But this is a perfect opportunity to teach a topic like factors and multiples and whatever else you want to call it. You can even get a bit of modular arithmetic in there. Look, if I take the hearts, if I just pull out all the hearts, you get the 7 and then the 6 and the 5. Why is that counting down? Why is that incrementing down by 1? Have a think about that. There's some modular arithmetic going on there. This is not something you can teach in 5 minutes, but the system itself is incredibly simple. And do you know why else? The other reason I like it, it just demonstrates that it's not about memorization or not memorization. Memorization isn't the enemy. When you have structures on your side, when you have an eagle eye trained on patterns, you can memorize the placement of 52 cards in a deck at the drop of a hat just by knowing how to add 3 and follow a chased order. So that's Cy Stebbins, and that's just one of the things that we explore in that course. Let me head back to the desktop. I think I've got just a few minutes. There are many courses I didn't get a chance to share with you today. I'm enthusiastic about all of them. As I said, I had to kill some of my darlings. You'll know this as Sudoku. You may also know that actually there's a whole range of Japanese grid-like puzzles. It's just a phenomenon over there. And I think it is starting to make its way to all corners of the world. And so we spend the whole 4 weeks just working through different types of puzzles. And they have different common threads, but they also each require a very particular type of reasoning. Very good mindfulness exercise too, working through those. Here's a course of number patterns. You can see there the Fibonacci spiral, or an approximation of it at least. And you can't really do a course on number patterns without then talking about prime numbers. But that course isn't called prime numbers, it's called prime mysteries, because there's nothing about prime numbers that isn't shady and mysterious. And I just want to mention here that one realization I've come to is that you can create any course you like on any topic, but when you ask students what they want to revisit or do again, the answer will always be Dan Finkel's Prime Time. That game is an absolute winner. Here are those platonic solids that my students were clutching so proudly at the beginning, we actually create all of the platonic solids. That's actually only 4 of them. There's one more. We create them all using origami. So it's a very tactile experience again, but once we've created them, we can examine their properties, like the Euler formula that connects the number of vertices, edges, and faces. And I think I've got one more. Yeah, last but not least, we pay tribute to exploding dots because it's a phenomenal concept. If you've not come across it already, I'm sure most of you have. And the resources are already there. They're ready made. So thanks so much to James and the team for that. And frankly, we could spend a whole year on exploding dots and it would be time well spent. So we just really take a sneak preview. And that's actually what I say about a lot of these courses. They're just entry points. We're just offering a glimpse into these different mathematical playgrounds and hopefully leaving students with an impression of mathematics that just departs from the mathematics that they're used to at school, that isn't so judgmental, that's very much inclusive and playful, and is very much aligned with the brand of mathematics that so many of us are in love with, and that most of all helps to reinforce their mathematical identity. So just very quickly, there are things that I feel are still unresolved. I feel like we're having a good time in Maths Club each week. I feel like the students are learning something, but have I really put that to the test? How would I define efficacy? What does a successful outcome look like? Can it be measured? And I'm always nervous about measurement because the moment you attempt to measure it, there's a risk of diluting the very thing you're trying to measure. That's Campbell's law. But secondly, even if this works in the context of an online maths club, how do we propel it into the mainstream? How do we get this in front and center of the curriculum and into classrooms so it's not something that's just wheeled out once a semester for the highest attaining kids? How do we do that? And finally, I think it just behooves us in this day and age to think about how technology can facilitate this kind of learning. I know that I'm already leveraging a whole range of tools, whether it's a conferencing platform like Zoom or whether it's some of those interactive platforms that I mentioned earlier. But in what other ways can technology really help us to make that leap and to help showcase the richness and diversity of mathematics? I think I'll stop there. I would really love for you to stay in touch, whether it's on Twitter or by email, if you want to learn more about any of the courses or indeed have suggestions of your own. It's always great to meet kindred spirits. So thank you so much for your time. I'm going to hand back over to John, and I'm trying frantically to stop sharing my screen. So I'm going to.
No worries, I can help you with that. Thanks so much, Janine. I think those last 3 questions that keep you up at night are going to keep us up at night, and also kind of keep us thinking about what we can do here in our own classrooms and even with our own children. I know that that was going through my mind here in your session here, and I wanted to comment on a couple things here. Like that phrase, I really liked how you called you didn't call the prime numbers course like prime numbers, you call it prime mysteries. And I thought that was just like encapsulates so much of what you discussed here today. And I want to talk about 2 other things that you brought up here in relation to some replays here. I know that folks do look forward to the replays of this session and other sessions. The replays are in our will be in our Make Math Moments Academy come Monday. Everyone's got them on the website throughout the weekend. But you brought up James Tanton's exploding dots, and James Tanton was actually the last 2 years. This is our 3rd year of running the summit, this free online conference. And last year James was here with us for a session, and the year before that he did a full session on exploding dots, and I thought that was great to kind of tie into what you said. And then the other thing about Prime Climb, such a great game. I have that with my own kids, and they love it. But we also had Dan Finkel here in the summit 2 years ago as well. And those replays are still over in the Academy if anybody wants to jump in there and get access to those sessions as well. They're included when you sign up for those 30 days for free in the Academy, where these replays are also going to go. Now, if you've been with us with any of our sessions today, you know that we have a draw. We're going to give away some stuff here right now. But before we do, we do want to thank our sponsors. We got our 7 main sponsors: Brandon Camp, Corwin, Heinemann, Mathology from Pearson, the Math Learning Center, Whitebook, and Mathagon. They've allowed this to be free for you folks, and what we're giving away in this session is Mathagon's donating a poster, and they're going to send this out to you. They're going to ship it to your house. So what we've been doing in the sessions at the end, Junaid, is we've been asking the participants to tell us their biggest takeaway from the session. So if you want to do that right now in the chat, folks, tell us what is your biggest session way before you take off. And what we're going to do is we're going to randomly scroll through that list, and we're going to point to one of those entries, one of those big takeaways, and then that person is like a draw. They'll win this Mathagon's poster that we'll send out to their house. Now, do you want to do the random pick, or do you want me to do that?
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure I trust myself to be totally random here. So let's see. I'm gonna look away.
It's tough. It's tough to be totally random here.
And this will be split second. There we go. How to increase my materials. I've lost it. There's so many more coming through.
I saw it. Is that the one? I got it right here.
Nicholas. How to increase my materials for math. And I love that Nicholas has put the S in parentheses to be very diplomatic about it. Mm-hmm. So how to increase my material for math or maths club.
Awesome. Nicholas, you have won the draw here for the Mathagon poster. What you're going to do is to claim it. Any email you received from us here today, hit reply on that email or any one of those emails, and then say, "Hey, I'm the Nicholas that won the poster in this session," and we'll get your details, and we'll get Mathagon to ship that out to your house. Hey, Junaid, I want to thank you so much for donating your time here and sharing your expertise. I know that so many great ideas and resources have been given out, and we can't thank you enough. It's been such a great hour here with you, and I know that we could keep chatting even further. So thanks so much to you.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity. It's been an absolute joy this past hour, and thank you to everyone.
Awesome.
I do feel a connection, even though it's over a Zoom webinar. I'm so grateful for everyone's participation. Right. Thank you. And
soon we'll see you face to face.
I hope so.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. And thanks so much for joining us in this session. We've still got a few more sessions this afternoon. Be sure to get back to your email or head on over to summit.makemathmoments.com, and you can see which sessions are running, and you can adjust your schedule at any time. So we've got some more this afternoon, and we are doing this all again tomorrow, so don't forget about that. And we'll see you there. Everyone, take care. Thanks a lot.